unemployment is vast in many parts of the EU, and even in the UK, where some of your listeners will know that employment has been rising recently, but what that masks is that a lot of high-earning jobs are now going part-time, and a lot of people who were in good-paying jobs are now self-employed, earning about £1,000 a month, which actually is about the minimum wage. So actually, people's incomes are not rising unless you're a banker. So no, I don't agree with continuing the status quo, printing money, basically handing it to the city or to the casino or Wall Street. I don't agree with that at all. And the talk of austerity it's a red herring. What it is the ultimate result of deleveraging. In Spain, for example, where you are, as you know, the banks are in a loss-making position to the tune of hundreds of billions of euros. Let them go bust. Stop borrowing money, Mr. Rajoy. Stop borrowing money and handing it to them. Let the banks go bust. The property prices are already collapsing anyway, so it's not as if you can stop property collapsing. By letting by Spain, if Spain were to leave the euro tomorrow, that would be the best thing that could happen to it. It would leave the euro, go back to the peseta would devalue, asset prices would fall, and you could then export more by getting more tourists in who would flock into Spain, and also the likes of Seat would be able to export more cars and so on, and it would help the economy tremendously. But no, they stick with the euro, they stick with trying to bail out the banks. Well, it isn't going to work. It hasn't worked for the last 4 years. It's not going to work until it's proven, and I suspect that next year Spain will leave the euro after, of course, tens of millions have been in penury, in severe economic hardship. For what benefit? Not certainly for the people.
Okay,
so
well,
no, I'm totally against the current policies.
Let's look at what you're saying about the idea of Spain leaving the euro. Now, Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande have got together and said they are, and I quote, deeply committed to the integrity of the eurozone. When you read on, they're going to make sure it doesn't fall. They're saying we cannot afford it to fall. You obviously believe that it wouldn't be a big deal if the likes of Spain left the eurozone and came up with a whole new peseta or whatever, and they obviously believe it really has to stick together. Why? What's the difference between your thinkings?
Yes, well, first of all, I think your listeners need to hone in on reality. The reality is that these politicians, whether in France or Germany or in Brussels or in Spain or in Greece or wherever, they've been saying for the last 4 years, time after time after time, we must stick together, we must save the euro, and this is the only way to secure economic growth. Well, they have been wrong month after month, after statement, after EU summit after EU summit. I think they're now about to have their 18th summit, when no doubt they'll come out smiling, saying we have solved the problem. They will, of course, have solved absolutely nothing. All they have done is put their economies into even greater penury. Now, going back to your question, why they're doing it, why they're trying to keep the EU together, is because actually it helps the bankers and it helps the politicians. You'll have noticed in recent years, particularly last year or two, that anti-EU politicians have been getting bigger and bigger poll ratings. In other words, whether you're on the left or the right, if you're in the major mainstream parties, it suits you to stick with the status quo. But Syriza in Greece, the Pirates Party in Germany and Finland, a particular one, I can't remember the name, in Italy. These guys are getting 20% polls. United Kingdom Independence Party is getting 15% polls. It doesn't even have an MP in the House of Commons, and yet it's getting 15% in the polls, because ripping up the Maastricht Treaty is difficult, is bad for the existing kleptocracy, as I call them, the thieves who currently populate the governments or the European Union, the status quo, in other words. So that's the reason why they don't want to break up the EU. Actually, Merkel is an idiot, because over 50% of Germans are actually anti the euro now. Over 60% of Germans want Greece to leave the euro, and as it happens, it would be brilliant for Germany if it left the euro. I don't know why they don't do it, because it seems pretty obvious to me they'd do very well if they did.
There are things within some of the figures that we talk about here that I don't necessarily believe are quite right. For example, this thing about Spanish unemployment figures. Now, one of the things that I know, living here and having worked and been part of talking to employers, the biggest problem that they have over here is that it costs a lot of money to employ someone, and it costs a lot more to get rid of them. We have situations happening all the time where someone, for example, would like to lay someone off, they're past their best or whatever, and they can't afford to do it. We have had situations here where restaurants, for example, has given a restaurant to 4 of his staff as their payoff. All the while that happens, there's going to be people being paid black money, and that puts them on the unemployment list. If that system was resolved, I think that unemployment list would come down massively.
Absolutely. There are major vested interests in the status quo. I've just been talking about the politicians, the bankers, obviously. But on the other side, you've got the trade unions and the trade union members, who have got such a tight hold also on the politicians. And as I say, whether it's the left or the right, everyone wants the status quo. And yet, when you consider all the promises that governments have made to their electorate over decades, to do with, for example, pensions and retirement and social welfare and employment rights and whatever, and you wonder why these people wonder why Spain has 50% youth unemployment, and the answer is very simple. You've hit the nail on the head, because employers are terrified about employing someone in case they're incompetent. So they absolutely will not take on anyone who's got no experience and so on. And similarly, on the other side, they can't get rid of anyone who is incompetent or lazy, who's been there already, because of the promises by the politicians to get elected. And we will bring in such rights that you will never lose your job, and so on and so on. And the people vote for that without actually thinking, what's it going to do to my kids? And the answer is, there's a lost generation, never mind a lost decade that we hear all the time. It's a lost generation who will never be able to acquire skills, experience, or indeed savings and assets.
Yeah, I actually think it's more than one generation. I was reading the other day that the average first-time buyer now is 38 years old. I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. I'm talking about in the UK.
In the UK, that's indeed the case. But think about it. You've had you're in the throes of a Spanish house price crash. Prices are down, say, 50%, although not in the official statistics. But the reality is that when they go, and I say when they go down 70 or 80%, or indeed some countries will be able to buy Spanish properties at effectively 10 pence in the pound when the peseta devalues, do you not think that they're going to sell a lot of properties and they're going to get people coming back into Spain? And also, if youngsters can get a job, which I don't know if they will, but if they can get a job, they'll be able to buy an apartment or a villa at say 20 or 30 pence or 30 cents in the euro. In other words, the employers will be able to pay them less money, but the employee's standard of living will be as good as their parents. So I never understand the mentality of Brits who absolutely are terrified of falling house prices. Because actually, with high house prices in London and the southeast, we are massively stifling the economy. Bring the house prices down, we can actually get the economy moving. And that would be one of the results of telling the bankers where to go, and that would bring the house price edifice down. As it happens, the market has already collapsed. The numbers of sales is down 50%. The prices will follow. So any of your listeners who've got property in London or the southeast, do not for one moment believe that somehow we are insulated from the worldwide house price crash. On the contrary, in fact, I actually think London southeast will be as big as, if not bigger, than practically anywhere else, because we have an enormous amount of debt in our society. In fact, along with Japan, we have this equally the largest amount of debt for an economy on the planet.
Interesting point about the house prices, but we're really going to have to get up to my last question now, Jonathan, and I think you've moved up to it beautifully when you were talking about bankers. I just wanted to... I don't know exactly what your reaction... If you could respond to this without swearing, I'd appreciate it, Jonathan. Jerry Delmisier is going to receive an $8.75 million windfall after leaving Barclays Bank, after resigning in disgrace over the LIBOR scandal. What do you think of that, Jonathan?
Look, the mainstream media doesn't get it. It absolutely takes the bankers and the mainstream economists and the mainstream politicians' commentaries that we have to keep on bailing out banks and handing money to bankers. The reality is these guys are laughing their heads off. They are literally committing major fraud. And not only are they not being prosecuted, but they're being handed their bonuses or multi-million pound severance packages. It is beyond crazy. It is beyond ugly. Where are the prosecutions? Where are the accountabilities? Where is anything? Why is nothing happening? Why are these people getting away with proverbial murder? Yep. My answer to it is because the politicians are in their back pockets. It's frightening where this could lead to. I'll tell you, for example, Greece, Spain, Portugal. I think your listeners need to expect either or all of them not to be democracies within 5 or 10 years. That's how bad it could get. And these politicians and bankers and mainstream economists, they are running us into the ground, at least financially, and unfortunately, frighteningly, potentially, politically too.
Jonathan, there are things that you and I mean, I don't particularly come out on air and say that. There's no reason to, but there's things that you and I disagree with vehemently, and there are things that we're totally in tune with. And I suppose that's the way of life. And as far as the whole banking system is concerned, I utterly agree with you. One of the things that really frustrates me is there was a couple in Sunderland who apparently had been selling at boot sales and on eBay, and they've actually doing prison time for avoiding a bit of tax. What we're talking about in terms of money is an absolute infinitesimal, tiny amount compared to these amounts that these bankers are getting away with. And as you rightly say, no sign of a prosecution in sight at all. It's disgraceful, isn't it?
It's beyond disgraceful. It's frightening. How come they have got the politicians, the legal authorities, the police, in their pocket, that they can get away with fraud after fraud after Bernie Madoff, AIG, Lehman Brothers, Barclays, HSBC, they're all out of the City of London. Where has been the regulation? The answer is nowhere. Never mind the financial regulation. Where are the criminal prosecutions for obvious fraud? And when I say obvious, it's out there. Everyone knows it's fraud. Where are the prosecutions? And I'll tell you what, if we get any prosecutions for LIBOR, for example, it'll be the corporals and the sergeants.
Absolutely.
What we need to get is, like the guy you mentioned, 8.75 million. These are the generals. These are the guys who should be put in jail and the key thrown away. That's when the frauds will stop dead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. I mean, this is, frustrates the hell out of me. I don't understand it. I don't know what we can do about it. I've got a political commentator coming on later. I'm going to be asking him exactly that question. Boys and girls, those of you who know Jonathan's voice, he is the MD of Jonathan Davis Wealth Management. Scares the hell out of me. Sometimes makes me want to jump off the cliffs, but always good to talk to you and always interesting comment, Jonathan. Thank you ever so much for your time tonight.
My very great pleasure, Kenny, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, and we'll speak again. Cheers, Jonathan. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.